Well, a proposed law giving Boris Johnson's government the power to override parts of the Brexit agreement with the EU has passed its first hurdle. MPs backed the Internal Markets Bill by 340 to 663 votes. Ministers say it contains vital safeguards to protect Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK if negotiations on a future trade deal break down. But critics argue, including a number of Tory MPs, warning that it risks damaging the UK by breaching international law. 30 Tories abstained, 2 Tories voted against. We can speak to one of them now. Sir Roger Gale is the Conservative MP for North Thanet. Roger Gale, afternoon to you, sir. What happened to party loyalty?
It's not a question of party loyalty. It's a question of loyalty to principle. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to do actually with the EU or Brexit or remaining or voting leave or anything. It's to do with international agreements and whether we as a country have a reputation for keeping our word or breaking our word. And historically, we have always kept our word. An Englishman's word is his bond. It always has been. I have no problem with a Prime Minister wanting to renegotiate a deal, but you renegotiate. You discuss with the other parties, the other signatories to the agreement, and then you change it if you can. But what you don't do is try and do it unilaterally. And I think it was wrong, and that's why I voted the way I did.
If you sense that you're, I don't reluctantly use the word opponents here, we shouldn't be perhaps describing the relationship in such a way, but I think Mr. Johnson was sort of in that territory yesterday. If you sense there are immovable objects in your way, then you can only respond accordingly.
Well, I think that's right. I'm not remotely surprised. In fact, I'm surprised that there was one other. I thought I might be the only one voting against, because contrary to popular belief, I haven't been orchestrating this. I'm actually working in isolation. I did what I believed to be right, judging myself by the principles that I judge my politics by, and I have to wake up in the morning and be able to look myself in the shaving mirror.
Do you think Boris Johnson is right? I mean, even if you just parking the principle of what's being described as breaking international law, which for many people is a fairly hyperbolic way to describe this. However, just parking that for 1 second, do you agree with Mr. Johnson's contention about the nature of this particular focused area on the Northern Ireland issue?
No, I don't. Because, let's go back a couple of paces. Mr. Johnson did this deal. Nobody imposed it upon him. It wasn't something he inherited from the previous Prime Minister. He brokered this deal. He signed it. He acclaimed it as a great success. He took it before the House of Commons and got it through the House of Commons. And now suddenly, 7 months later, oh dear, there are things wrong with it. Well, forgive me, he was told at the time by the DUP and by me and a few others that this was going to lead to a border down the Irish Sea. It's all right, it'll be okay, don't worry about it. Well, now, suddenly this is not the case. What I really fear, and I do fear, is that the Prime Minister says, this will only be used in extremis if the dreadful Europeans try to block food going from Britain to Northern Ireland. Well, I don't think they will. There's no indication of that. It was trumpeted long and loud at the dispatch box yesterday, but I've seen no indication that this is actually likely. But were that to happen, were he have to, if we don't get a deal, were he to have to implement this law, which, by the way, there is already provision for within the withdrawal agreement, but setting that aside, if this goes through and is used, it would lead to a hard border between the North and the Irish Republic, and that's the last thing anybody wants.
What's your take then on Article 38, which, as I understand it, and I stand to be corrected, Sir Roger Gale, allows a country to invoke its sovereignty card, as it were, to be able to play that and say there's actually something in this. We've looked at it again. We've had some initial trade negotiations. It seems now it's not going to work, so enter Article 38 to the equation.
Well, no, there isn't a get-out-of-jail card. You either stand by your word, as far as I'm concerned. I was almost in a minority of one. I'm practically in a minority of one. But as far as I'm concerned, this is a matter of principle. You don't enter into willingly, freely. Nobody held a gun to his head and said, you've got to sign this, Prime Minister. He signed it. And he not only signed it, but he acclaimed it as a triumph. For my money, You don't do that and then a relatively few months later say, oh, we don't like this anymore, we want to change it, without discussing it with the other side. I mean, if you want, as I said, if you want to renegotiate it, well, that's fine, renegotiate it. That's perfectly honourable. But to break an international agreement, particularly, I mean, any time actually is bad. I'm not going to qualify it. However, the timing could not be worse because we are just about to embark upon negotiations, trade negotiations with all sorts of countries that we're going to need to do deals with the other side of Brexit. And by the way, although I voted Remain, I have supported the will of the British people since the day it was done. So I'm not a rabid Remainer. Far from it, actually. I'm a Eurosceptic by nature, for many of the reasons that others in your trail have mentioned. I do think it is bureaucratic and overweening and extravagant and all those things. However, on the grounds of security, and that's my priority, I believe that we are better as part of a bigger bloc. That's another issue. But we're about to embark upon a lot of trade deals. And I just don't want the people on the other side of the table to think, hang on a minute, if we sign this, is it worth the paper it's written on? And the other thing is, if I may just finish, that I have a lot of dealings with Russia and with Turkey and with Azerbaijan and Armenia and the other 46 member states of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And we have continually been holding their feet to the fire and saying, you must obey international law. Well, where the hell does this leave us? If we're told that Peter Tolstoy, the lead Russian man in his country's delegation, has every right to turn around to me and say, well, you break the law, so why shouldn't we?
On that point, Sir Roger Gale, thank you. Conservative MP for North Thanet. You heard he's one of two Tories that voted against it. There were 30 abstentions. Let's speak to Gary Sambrook, Conservative MP for Birmingham Northfield, voted for the bill. Gary Sambrook, afternoon to you. I mean, how would you respond firstly to Roger Gale's last point there? How could you look somebody in the face and condemn them for breaching international law if we're doing the same thing?
Well, good afternoon. I think realistically what we have to look at here is that there are very different things that we're looking at. And I mean, comparisons to places like Russia, etc., who are breaking, instances of human rights is very different to this, where we're trying to protect our own United Kingdom against what is essentially negotiations which are going on in very bad faith by the European Union. So I was more than happy yesterday to be able to support the Prime Minister and the government to deliver on this, because I think it was very important to do so.
When this withdrawal agreement was first put together, you were one of those MPs that shouted from the rafters and said, this is a great agreement, Boris has gone and done it. Theresa May couldn't make it work, but Boris has made it work. What's changed between then and now?
Well, what has changed is that we've seen over the last couple of months a series of incidences where the EU have been negotiating in bad faith. The withdrawal agreement hasn't been abandoned. We're not abandoning the Northern Ireland Protocol. In fact, the government are investing millions of pounds on making sure that the Northern Ireland Protocol actually works and is implementable in the new year, as Michael Gove set out last night. But what we've seen is that, when we look at Great Britain to Northern Ireland transfer of goods, we had within the Northern Ireland Protocol, there was an explicit measure put in place whereby goods could be listed which were deemed at risk of going from GB into Northern Ireland and then into Ireland. What the EU have attempted to do during these negotiations is put everything on that list. And it's completely unthinkable that Scottish beef or Welsh lamb or Devonshire cream cannot go into Northern Ireland without tariffs being attached. And so that's why I think that what we did last night by protecting our United Kingdom and putting in these measures in place within this bill, and then also equipping the government with an insurance policy, being able to go into the negotiations and say, look, we're not going to tolerate this. You've acted in bad faith. That is the exactly right thing to do, and that's why I supported it.
Roger Gale's contention was that this could, if you took it to its natural, or one of its natural conclusions, it could lead to a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and surely that would end in chaos.
Yes, but we also have to look at the United Kingdom. This is a union of nations which has lasted 300 years. It is the most successful union of nations ever in the history of our our country and of our continent as well. And while other countries in the past were looking at fighting each other, the United Kingdom decides to come together in an economic.
But you'd be tearing up the Good Friday Agreement in doing so. You're okay with that?
No, I don't think that is the case at all. And I think that what we have done is equip the government in ensuring, and bear in mind also that this is absolute last measure. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary last night were absolutely clear that there are issues within the withdrawal agreement which will allow mitigation to go ahead, and they will be exhausting those processes. And hopefully the European Union will be taking off the table about the listing, and will be able to go forward in good faith.
What about your colleagues that abstained and the two that voted? What would you say to Roger Gale when it comes going to be amendments aplenty being thrown around next week? Gary Sambrook, what would you say when you meet Roger Gale? Well, he's not in Parliament at the moment, he's shielding, but if you were to speak to him, what would your advice be as a fellow Tory to somebody like Roger who voted against it? What do you know that he doesn't?
Well, I would say to anybody that identifies as a unionist, but this is exactly the right thing to do, and we need to deliver it to make sure that the government has the correct tools at its hand to be able to negotiate.
And on that point, Gary Sambrook, thank you, Conservative MP for Birmingham Northfield. You heard two sides of a Conservative story there from Mr Sambrook, who's the Tory MP for Birmingham Northfield, Roger Gale, Tory MP for North Thanet. 0344 499 1000. I mean, that's on the detail of what happened yesterday. That just gives you an idea of the nature of what we're currently dealing with, what Johnson and his government are currently dealing with, what Barnier and his side are currently dealing with, what the DUP in Ireland are currently dealing with, what the Taoiseach and others are currently dealing with. So you just get a sense in one tiny microcosm of this huge Brexit picture, the difficulties and the hurdles and the controversy and the rather daunting and worrying place it could end up in. So based on that, throw in all the other factors. Have you got Brexit fatigue? Do you regret your vote? When you hear our politicians here, 4.5 years on from when you went to the ballot box, do you now regret voting to even leave the EU?